Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Monica Maggio. My business is Core Home Fruit. I've been working with people and plants for the better part of 15 years. My expertise is based in the Willamette Valley. There's a lot of fruit growing. Maybe you guys like YouTube. You always want to vet your sources. Where is that person? Like, first of all, does that person have experience that you trust? And secondly, where are they? Because you're going to prune fruit trees a little bit different if you're in California and you have to deal with hot summers. You're going to prune your fruit tree a little different if you're in New England and you have to deal with cold winters and lots of snow. So here's the thing, we don't deal with that. We don't get blistering hot summers, and we don't usually get 10 feet of snow for 10 weeks. So we have a slightly different way that we want to be pruning our fruit trees for the Pacific Northwest, for the Willamette Valley. So I will say that we are going to run through this pretty quickly. I will take questions afterwards in the hallway. Pruning is something that you're probably going to come back to time and time again. I came to fruit tree pruning with about 10 years of ornamental pruning experience. It still took me a couple of years to really get it down to the point where I could be teaching it and comfortable with it. So I say that because 25 minutes is super short. Okay, I've taught 4 to 6 hour classes just on this topic alone. But we're going to review some of the highlights. There's a handout for the class. There's 2 handouts for the class, actually. One that I generated with some information, another that's coming to you from OSU Extension. So make sure you grab those either now or before you head out. They're going to be really handy resources for when you go back home and try to figure out what's going on with your trees. So I asked this last time, but how many of you have fruit trees? Excellent. How many of you pruned on them this year? This year should have been done every year. Pruning your fruit tree is an annual event.
Can it still be done?
Can it still be done? Well, yeah, we'll talk about that. So why we're doing it in the first place is that we need the first thing on that list is better sunlight and airflow. Okay, we live in a wet place, and we don't want a lot of that moisture to stick around in the canopy. We need to open it up so that sunlight and airflow gets into the tree. Sunlight is also how trees make energy. Fruit takes a lot of energy to create. I'm just going to assume that you guys are growing fruit trees and you wouldn't mind it if they fruited for you, yeah? It's part of why you have them. So we also want to prune in a way that helps us maximize the fruit-bearing surface. Also, we need our trees to be strong. If you have a 6-foot dwarfing apple tree, how many pounds of apples can it put on each year? 25 to 35 pounds. It's pretty heavy. Can you think about holding a 35-pound grocery bag like out here? Well, your fruit tree is trying to do that. So you have to make sure you give it nice, strong branches to hold that seasonal weight, because that doesn't happen all year round. It happens over time as that fruit is ripening. We also want to shape it better so that we can get in there and do the stuff that we need to do, thinning, harvesting. Also, what's nice is that we can create a rather pleasing and useful shape when we prune. It also will help make pest management and some of these other maintenance things a little easier to do. So the thing is, I want you to be very familiar about looking at a tree. Before you even begin to make cuts, I want you to really meet your fruit tree. They're on your handout. First off, where are the suckers? No, where are the suckers? Where are the suckers? From the roots. Yes, they are. In literature, they often talk about suckers and water sprouts in the same way. They are not the same. Suckers are coming from the rootstock. You can remove them anytime. Water sprouts are coming from the branches. What does the literature say for you to do? Take them out. What happens? They all come back. We're going to talk about the myth of the water sprout. They're not that bad. First, you need to realize, though, that they're coming from branches and suckers are coming from the roots. The other things to know is that most fruit trees are grafted. Right? We've chosen a set of genetics on the bottom for their rooting capacity. If we have a small root system, am I going to have a small or large tree? Small tree. If I have a large root system, I'm going to have a Large tree. We chose the top half, called the scion, for its fruiting capacity. That's what's going to determine whether you have a Honeycrisp, a Brareburn, a Pink Lady, a Williams Pride apple. Right? We get to mix and match. The other thing to know is where they come together is the graft union that needs to be planted at least 6 to 10 inches above the soil. We also, if you go down your list, what else have we covered? There's scaffold branches, scaffolding, structure, strength, the inner part of your tree that's there for stability, versus lateral branches, which are more on the outside, and that's where you're going to see a lot more of your fruit wood happen. You should also be aware of where branch crotches are, where branches come together, either big ones or small ones. Very important to get to know your branch collars. Never, ever, ever cut into the collar. If you do, the collar is this wrinkly part here, or sometimes it's very subtle, more like lines. If you do, you're going to get cut like that. What you want is a cut like this. The collar is that donut shape that grows over where you've made the cut that helps to seal the tree and give it strength and protection over time. This, not good for stability. This branch is kind of screwed as far as stability goes. And then you're going to have dead wood here that's exposed, and what's going to come find that dead wood? Diseases and insects, right? And much like my arm doesn't stop right here, there are cells that connect into the base of my body. Same thing with a branch. The branch doesn't end right here. There's actually cells that come down into here, and now we've left it open for that dead wood to invite pests and diseases into the rest of our tree. Also, I want you to get more comfortable looking for vegetative versus fruit wood. How many here can tell the difference between a vegetative bud and a fruit bud? Very few hands. I want to help with that. So on here, one branch coming off a thicker branch, right here it transitions from being fresh, brand new growth to being older, woody growth where we see fruit spurs coming off. This is an apple tree. This is what I want you guys to be able to do before you make any cuts at all on your tree. I want you to first be able to answer the question, what type of plant is it? Is it a fig tree? Is it an apple tree? Is it a mulberry tree? Is it a persimmon? And the second question is, where does that tree best set its fruit? Because we don't want to cut off the part of the plant that makes the fruit. Very easy to do if you don't know the difference. So let's practice. If you had to circle the words that describe each of these, what would you circle? Think about it for a second. Are any of them annuals? No. Are any of them evergreen? No. They are all woody, perennial, deciduous trees. All of them. Now, where do those plants best set their fruit? Your options are new growth, old growth, 1 to 3 year old growth, only at the tips of branches, on fruit spurs. Hold on. Think about it. For apple and pear, for plum, cherry, or peach, for fig or persimmon. Each one is different. Okay, so you have the same exact type of plants. You have woody, deciduous, perennial trees. But apples and pears fruit where? 2 year and older. You're not going to see very much fruit at all on that new growth unless you have the exception to the rule, which is a tip bearer. Very few varieties are tip bearers. So you don't have new growth, you don't have fruit on your new growth, versus if you have a stone fruit, a fruit with a pit inside, a cherry, a peach, a plum, where does it best set its fruit? 1 to 3 year old growth, new growth. This is all in your handout, by the way. Okay, if you have a fig, who here has fig trees? Where do they set their fruit? It's only your first crop of 2014 is at the tip of 2013's growth. Your second crop of 2014 is on new growth for 2014. As soon as you get into 2 year and older growth, no more figs. No more figs. Right now, your fruit set, your first fruit set, which is usually all we get on a fig, is present at the very tips of the new growth last year. That's it. Also, if you have a persimmon, it's only off of new growth, brand new growth, 2014 growth, coming off of 1 year old growth. You're not going to see a lot of that 1-year-old growth coming off of older branches. So this is going to change what you decide to remove from your tree. Now those fruit spurs, let's take a look. So stone fruits, again, have pits inside. They fruit better on their 1 to 3-year-old wood. Apples and pears are called POME fruits. They have seeds inside. They fruit on fruit spurs that show up on branches 2 years and older. And how long do those fruit spurs make fruit for? 10 years. Do I want to cut them off? No. I can have a 6-year-old branch with a 1 to 6-year-old fruit spur on it. Do I want to cut that branch off? No. I have a 6-year-old branch in my cherry tree. Is it making very much fruit for me? No. Do I want to cut it off? Probably. It's going to be something I'm going to consider. Okay, so when your apples and your pears, you're preserving that older wood. You're preserving those fruit spurs. And the newer, so I don't know if you can see because the colors are a little bit weird, but this is an apple. We've got new growth here, no fruit spurs. Wrinkle, 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 2-year-old growth, spur, spur, spur. Wrinkle, 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 3-year-old growth, spur, spur. Over here, this is where we transition in the cherry tree between new growth and old growth. Check out all those fruit buds right there at the base of new growth. Start getting used to kind of looking for this, looking for your fruit buds. Fruit spurs, how many feet can an apple tree put on a year in new growth? Anybody have a Gravenstein? Yeah, how much do they grow every year? Tremendous, 6+ feet. Anywhere from 6 inches to 6 feet. Now, how much do fruit spurs grow every year? 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch. So they start to get these little wrinkles because when they grow, when those buds open, they leave a little scar. So we have bud, wrinkle, 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 wrinkle. They start looking like these accordions and they come off at a 90-degree angle off of the plant, usually, of the branch. So get used to seeing your fruit spurs. Also, fruit trees are woody, right? How thick is fruit tree bark? Thinner than your handout. So when we're pruning, it's very important that we know exactly where we want to be cutting, and we're going to be cutting with sharp tools because we don't want to damage this bark, which isn't very thick to begin with. The cambium, the green xylem and phloem, the life highway of the tree, is right underneath that bark. With your thumbnail, you can gouge in and damage that cambium. Okay, so you're going to be very careful with how you prune your fruit trees. We're going to talk a little bit about pruning and training. Both of these are techniques to create a good, useful form. Pruning is when we make cuts to create the form. Training is when we actually move branches to make a form. It is important to remember that you train first and then prune. So how many of you guys have read books about pruning? How many of them mention training? Yeah, very few. It's kind of a bummer. It's a really important, fun technique. So when you're training, you're using strings or spreaders to create the shape of your tree. What would happen if all of these were taken out? Right? Straight up, vigorous growth. Now here's the thing. Branches that are growing straight up, they're mostly dormant right now. Where are they going to grow this spring? They're going to keep going straight up. What I can do, though, is if I bend it down to a 45-degree angle, what happens is that vegetative growth slows down, carbohydrates redistribute in the branch, I get more fruit wood. I also get a strong angle. 45 to 60 degrees is a very strong angle. I come down to 90 degrees, what happens? We get water sprouts and we have a weaker angle. So what are we going to go for? This, this, or this? This. Right, I've done no pruning, and I've taken really vegetative, vigorous growth and turned it into a good potential fruit branch. No cutting, just training. So we're looking to really use the whole 360 of a tree. We're trying to space branches evenly up the trunk. We're also looking to put about 6 inches, and that's the ideal, right? Then there's reality. There's definitely more than 6 inches between this branch, and less between this branch and this branch. You work with what you got. You really want to aim for those 45 to 60 degrees. You are either spreading branches out with string and spreaders or you're pulling branches up. You can do this any time of year so long as the branch is flexible enough to accept that new space, that new spot. This is the shape I want you guys to aim for. There are many different forms fruit trees can take. This is one, both research and my experience in people's yards. This is your most successful shape, the open center. I don't want to see a central leader. Central leader means you have a trunk going right at the middle. It tends to be too tall. You only have one place for branches versus this open center gives you lots and lots of options for those 45s. It also brings the height of the tree down and makes it a little wider, which means you can get to most of the tree from the ground if you have a smaller tree to begin with. These trees look like this. It also gives you the option to have multiple varieties on your tree. Each one of these branches is a different variety. Good for pollination, good for fruit set, good in case one year one of those varieties isn't going to do so hot. You still get fruit. So how do we make these decisions? How do we even go about making that form? I wanted to start with that theory because I think it's really important for you to begin to understand how to see a tree and to answer the question, where does it best set its fruit? Now let's talk about making cuts. The terms I want you to be familiar with are heading, thinning, 1/3 rule, the 3 Ds, releadering, and the 1, 2, 3 cut. Cuts that go back to a bud are called heading cuts. Cuts that go back to a branch are called thinning cuts. More important to remember the cause and effect. I do nothing to this branch. Where does it set most of its growth this spring? From the end, up here. I do this. Where does the growth go? Comes out the sides. The buds that are below the cut. I cut it here. Where does the growth go? Into the rest of the tree. Okay, I do nothing. Let's review. I do nothing. I get this. I make a heading cut. I get this. I make a thinning cut. Growth goes into the rest of the branches. You have a budget. How many here have seen trees where someone comes in and just goes zip, and then what happens? Whoosh, they all grow back. Part of what's happening is that they've taken off all of the growth regulating hormone off of the terminal buds. Back here, this has a growth regulation hormone in it. That's why it will grow the most if it's left there. If we cut it off, growth regulation is removed. Buds start to grow. So when someone cuts off all of those terminal buds, they send the message to the tree to grow like mad. The other thing is if you take off more than 1/3 of the tree's branches in a full year, you also send the message to the tree to grow like mad. Botanical reality. Suggestion is you don't take off more than 30% of your tree every year. Did this person take off more than 30%? These are all the branches back here. What is this going to look like? It's going to look like that. Imagine that with leaves on it. Good sunlight and airflow? No. Are there a lot of 45s in there? No. If this is an apple tree and we put a bunch of new growth on, is that going to equal a bunch of fruit wood and fruit spurs? No. I see this all the time. People cut off, go zip. Take off more than 30%, take off all their terminal buds, it all grows back. You get in a fist fight. Okay, you take off a bunch, it grows a bunch back. You take off a bunch, it grows a bunch back. All the while, that energy is being used to make those branches. Is it going into making fruit? No. So what you want to do is be patient. When I teach pruning, the biggest thing I teach is restraint. So if I have this tree and I want to rehab it and open it up, how many years is it going to take? If I can remove no more than 30%, say you take my recommendation and you only remove 25% of your tree. How many years? At least 4 years. You come in here, you take 25% of the branches out, stop. Say you go home and do this tomorrow. When can you make more cuts? March 9th, 2015. Stop. You also want to make sure that with your budget, one of the first things you're going to look for are your 3 Ds. Do you have any dead, diseased, or damaged limbs in your tree? Does dead wood count towards your budget? No. Does diseased wood count towards your budget? Yes, it's alive. Does damaged wood? Yes, it was alive a second ago. You can also re-leader. Say you have a central leader where you've got a bunch of branches going straight up tall. You can either try to train them down or you can cut. in a way that brings the energy into a more 45 or 60 degree angle. But notice that that was probably a fairly substantial cut. That might have taken out a third. Do I get to make more cuts? No. No. So when transitioning, you have to be patient. So now let's talk about the myth of the water sprout. Say you have a whole bunch of them. How many can you take out? 1/3. Stop. Then you're going to have 2 more that are going straight up, or 3 more, or however many more. What can you do with these? Train them. Problem, fruiting branch. Problem, fruiting branch. Water sprouts are just vigorous new growth. I want to encourage you to see the potential. I want you to see the form that you're trying to create. Don't just go in there and cut out everything you label as bad. If you do that, you're going to be no closer to creating a good, strong, fruitful shape. Instead, you're going to have to look for what's going right. You're going to have to foster the things that you want. You want those 45 degree angles. You want that open shape, because taking out all your water sprouts just because someone said they were bad is the best way to get involved in that fist fight. You're also going to want to have clean, sharp, and sterile tools for when you're working on your trees. Do you want people doing surgery on you with dull, dirty tools? How thick is that bark? This isn't a Douglas fir. The way that you clean your tools and sterilize them is choose one of these 3 things and wipe them on the cutting surfaces for 10 seconds. It's not going to get the super nasty viruses, but it's going to get a lot of the fungus and bacteria out of your blades. How often am I doing this? How often are you doing this? If you're taking out diseased wood, how often are you doing this? Every cut. In general, it's good to clean your tools between trees. Sometimes you can't see the diseases that have been established until much later. As a professional, I do this between each tree unless I notice some disease, and then I'm doing it every cut. Last thing I want to do is bring some of the disease you might have into your yard and vice versa. So if we're making big cuts, it's important. If I have a limb that I'm going to take out for whatever reason, if I start cutting right here, what happens? The weight of the branch might tear, and then have we cut into our collar? Yeah, no bueno, not good. So what we're going to do is we're going to plan for that cut, but first we're going to come multiple inches out, cut halfway through the bottom. Come out here, cut halfway through the top. This is going to fall off. Then I'm going to come in and make a nice controlled cut right up against my collar. If you need to leave a tiny bit of a stub, do that. Never cut off the collar. Don't even cut into it. If you're making small cuts, you're going to pick a bud and you're going to cut a nice 45 degree angle at an outward facing bud. Who here prunes roses? Okay, same idea. You don't want to have a branch that's going out like this and then pick a bud that's going to send a branch back in here. You want to pick a bud that's going to send a branch in an outward graceful shape. I got to go fast because we're almost done. So some of the things I could do here, what happens if I go chunk, chunk, chunk? I'm going to get a whole bunch of branches. I don't want a whole bunch of branches. So I'm going to probably do a thinning cut here and maybe cut this to send a branch that way. In review, mind your budget. That is science. That is a botanical reality, a cause and effect. You can choose to go over it. What's going to happen if you cut out more than 30%? You're going to get lots of vigorous new growth. Sometimes you want that. 9 times out of 10, you do not. Remember that this is going to be a 3 to 5 year process to transition. In general, more thinning cuts, less heading cuts. Again, I can teach you more. You can talk to me afterwards about some opportunities that I offer to learn more, or I can come hang out at your house and teach you guys. But in general, thank you. I'll be out in the hallway to answer questions.